On my walk today, I'd like to discuss a question of whether homeschooling is better than private schooling. Whether homeschooling is better than private schooling. Obviously, the answer to this question for any individual family is going to come down to all kinds of circumstances, and there's no way to provide an answer that's going to serve everyone well. But I'm going to talk taking what I'll call a normal Catholic family for granted. And by normal I mean single income, father works and provides for the family, the mother is at home caring for the children, managing the household during the day. I'm going to take that as the norm because that should be the norm. I've had the experience of both being a homeschool father and of being a private school teacher and administrator. So I think I can offer some unique insight on this question, since I've had the opportunity to serve in the real world in both of these two different circles, the homeschool circle and the private school circle. Now, I should say up front that even though I worked in private school teaching, I was the upper school classics teacher at a private preparatory school here in Charlotte. Even though I was teaching at a private school, my children were going to be homeschooled anyway. So we didn't homeschool because we had to. We homeschooled because it was how we wanted to raise and educate our children. But I'd like to talk about advantages and disadvantages of homeschooling, and I'd like to do so with an emphasis on the state of things in 2021, because I believe that opportunities for homeschool families and students has so dramatically changed in the last 10 years, last 5 years, that parents need to be very careful that they answer this question conscious of the real state of things in 2021, because things have changed very quickly for homeschooling, and COVID actually fast-forwarded the movement towards homeschooling very greatly by pushing everyone to online learning and in-home studies. And all of a sudden, everyone realized everything that these kids were doing at school could be done at home. And many didn't realize just how close homeschooling has come to replacing the need for schools altogether. So let's make sure we keep this discussion current and answer it not as if we're living in 1995 or 2005 or even 2015, but in 2021. Now, the number one reason why I believe homeschooling is better today than private schooling is because for Catholic families, the highest end of the education and formation of our children should be religious vocations. And so if that's the highest end of Catholic education, and it is, we have to ask the question, what form of education in 2021 gives our children the best opportunity to learn about, appreciate, and prepare for religious vocations? And I'll argue that it's homeschooling. Now, the reason why, first of all, is because homeschool children can learn to pray the Liturgy of the Hours every day at home. They can learn the system of prayers that would actually be their daily system of prayers if they did choose to enter just about any religious community in the Catholic Church. That system of daily prayers, readings, hymns, and so on can be learned at home and practiced throughout childhood. This is far more important than parents seem to understand. It's very common for us to hear homeschool parents, especially new homeschool parents, talk about how they're going to raise saints. And that sounds very nice, but we have to talk about the how of such an objective. If we look to the greatest model of Catholic learning and education, we would have to say it would be Thomas Aquinas. Well, Thomas Aquinas was raised in a monastery. He wasn't raised running around loose in the backyard. He wasn't raised hanging out at the beach, playing on the swings, and so on. He was raised from the time he was 5 years old in a Benedictine monastery, where he would have been immersed in the daily recitation of the divine office. He was raised praying. And it was in that context of a Benedictine community, fasting, praying, singing, and so on, that he was raised. A very tightly controlled experience as a child. The opposite of everything that children are given in modern schools. So I would argue that the opportunity to learn and pray the Liturgy of the Hours at home is the greatest advantage of homeschooling. I would also argue that the ability to participate frequently in the sacramental life is another great advantage of homeschooling. I honestly don't know how much attention is given to the sacraments in modern Catholic schools, but homeschool students can attend Mass daily, can make confession weekly, can serve at the altar all throughout the week, and so on. There are so many advantages for homeschool students. My children have served at the altar, not just for Sunday Masses and normal celebrations like that, but for all different sorts of events at church, communion Masses, confirmation Masses, Stations of the Cross, on and on, all sorts of opportunities, because they were always available, being homeschooled. Our deacon, who manages the altar servers, always knew that our boys were available, and so they were able to participate in many different events and ceremonies at church because of homeschooling. So these are two advantages of homeschooling that I think really separate it in 2021. The ability to pray the Liturgy of the Hours growing up, and the ability to participate frequently in the sacraments as a priority and focus of daily life. So the number one reason why I believe homeschooling is superior to private schooling in 2021 is because of the opportunity that it gives to students to learn about, appreciate, and participate in the life that they would be able to continue in religious vocations. The second advantage of homeschooling is clearly the financial cost. In 2021, the cost of private school education cannot be justified. It really can't. The idea of transporting someone physically from one location to another so that he can learn is obsolete. That's an idea that belonged to the past and is no longer true today. There is no longer any need for anyone to be physically moved from one place to another so that he can learn something. We don't need to travel to libraries. We don't need to visit great teachers. Everything and everyone is accessible online. And that's going to become increasingly true, even though it's true already. There's just no way to justify the cost of building schools, the cost of maintaining schools, the cost of paying faculty salaries to maintain a faculty at a local school when teaching is available from the best teachers online. If you're going to learn about the history of Europe, you don't need to learn from whoever the random teacher is that happens to be in your town. You can learn from the best history teacher in the world. And that's going to increasingly be the case. Elite teachers will be the only teachers. And all of these really unqualified, incompetent, mediocre, local teachers will be eliminated. Quality of instruction is going to continue to rapidly improve as we move from local instruction to global instruction. There's no justification for private school tuition. And as I always say, I believe that brick and mortar schools are a thing of the past. The internet has struck them with a mortal wound, and they're just going to slowly bleed out over the next few years or decade. But they're finished. And that's a third reason why I believe homeschooling is superior. Homeschooling is the education of the future. Private schooling is obsolete. All of the resources that are being designed with a view of remote learning. The quality of all of these services is increasing, and schools are no longer seen as the target audience for products and services that are being developed. One of the biggest trends in modern business is, whereas in the past there was so much need for business to business sales and marketing, now more and more the business to business model is being replaced by business to consumer, direct service. The producer, with just a little bit of work, can sell his own products globally. And that's going to continue to be the trend, with middlemen being replaced by technology. You're going to be a producer either of products or of content, and all of the middlemen who have made their living selling things produced by others are going to be bumped out of that economy. Private schooling is really a sort of middleman between the publishers and the students. Most school teachers do little more than administer a program of education found in the books that the school uses. This is clear in the existence of teacher manuals, which tell the teachers what to do, provide the teachers with assessments to give to the children, answer keys, and so on. Teachers are largely facilitators or administrators of textbooks or of some curriculum that's not able to go direct to the student. But in 2021, that's no longer the case. Publishers go direct to the student, and that's going to increase. More and more attention and money is going to be invested by publishers in serving the students directly through online learning as the technology continues to develop. So planning to send kids to private schools, I believe, is a short-sighted plan, and you may end up having the rug pulled out from under you when the private schools, I may have said public schools, but I mean private schools. If you're looking at a 5-year-old child planning 13 years of private school education, you may find those schools don't even exist in 10 years. We see schools closing, private schools closing all over the place. And I believe that's going to continue and increase in speed. We don't see many private schools opening as we did between 1995 and 2015, where there was a big boom in private Catholic schools, independent schools. We see many of these schools failing, but we don't see new schools opening. And that's going to continue. So it's risky to say we're going to plan on our children attending private schools. If there's going to be anything, it's going to be some sort of hybrid school that's going to supplement a homeschool. But the private schools are going to become increasingly unsustainable. And their costs are going to be unjustifiable. Now, some may object and say, yeah, but people have to work. People have to work, and so we need schools because schools allow people to work, but that's changing as well. COVID taught us again just how much work can be done from home, and honestly, I thought it was pretty cool to see people setting up offices in their home and doing their work with kids in the background or with a pet in the background. It was cool to see people relaxing, being more personal, and just getting their work done from the comfort of their own home with their kids around. I think that was a pretty cool insight into where a lot of business may be headed. Really, how many people sitting in cubicles in offices around the country really need to be in those cubicles to do their daily work? What's going to happen, I believe, is that while the big companies may just continue as they are, new companies, new, smaller, more agile companies are going to open that are going to take advantage of the technology to disrupt existing industries. And opportunities to work from home are going to become more and more common, and the larger companies are going to have to make compromises to let people work from home. One business consultant I was listening to recently said that he has employees today who ask for less pay and fewer days at the office. They would rather work from home and take a pay cut to be allowed to work from home. And he's saying that that's becoming more and more normal, especially for the younger generation that's very comfortable with the communications technology. Like my kids, for example. My oldest is 21, and the way that he uses communications technology is totally different from the way I use it. If I see a document on the internet that I'd like a copy of, I look for a way to forward a link or forward a copy to myself. If I open a page and I'm given a password reminder, or I'm shown my login credentials, I'll look for a piece of paper to write them down. My son will pull out his phone and just snap a picture of the screen. And when I see him do that, I realize that this next generation uses the technology much more comfortably than my generation does. My generation still thinks in old terms of how things are done and finds electronic ways to do the same things. But the younger generation who never did it the old way doesn't even think to do it the old way. And these younger people are going to begin entering into the market, starting new businesses, doing things different ways, and they're going to disrupt markets and create completely new working conditions, job opportunities. And there's going to be less and less of a need for anyone to, quote unquote, go to work. So the ability to be home for more and more people as technology continues to develop, and as a younger generation becomes more and more comfortable using that technology. A good example of this is how the younger generation uses video conferencing like FaceTime and WhatsApp and Zoom. The younger generation is just going to take that for granted. Whereas for me, it's still uncomfortable to go onto a video conference. I feel like I'm going on television. I feel like I need to look in the mirror and check. Whereas the younger generation, they don't think twice. The video's on as comfortably as I might answer a phone. They don't even think like that. They don't see video as television the way we did growing up. They're perfectly comfortable answering a call on FaceTime and just being present. They don't think about the background. They don't really care about the details of their appearance. Whereas when I grew up, anyone who went on camera was getting touched up by a makeup artist before the cameras went on. That idea of this perfect video appearance isn't part of this next generation's idea about video communication. And the effect of them coming into the workforce, coming into the market, is going to radically change things, because they're going to do things in much better ways than existing businesses do because of their comfort with the communication technology. I'm working as hard as I can to learn, and thankfully I've got some college students to help me see how these things are being used, on the front line. And it's pretty radical. So the argument that schools are necessary because people have to work is going to become a quieter and quieter and less common argument over time. So what I've said so far, the advantage: homeschooling allows for the cultivation of religious vocations in a way that's better, I believe, than private schools. Private school tuition is no longer justifiable because the schools really don't offer many advantages. The development of communications technology is making schools obsolete. And the work argument is going to take away much of the need or demand for private schools. When we see people working from home, we're going to see less and less justification for private school tuition. And that's going to raise a number of different issues. For example, many women work because of the assumption that they need to help pay tuition for their children's school. Whereas when that woman has the opportunity to work from home and the meetings are conducted through Zoom meetings, that woman's going to ask, why do I need to continue paying the private school tuition? Why can't I keep my children home and watch over their studies while I do my work? And so these changes are going to have a ripple effect that's just going to change everything. And COVID, like I said, gave us sort of a flash look into the future. And I know that people all throughout education, marketing, communications technology saw that and are working to move forward on it. One other thing I mentioned before was that parents with young children who are just going to plan to send them to school are assuming that schools are going to exist, and I don't know that they are. We already see schools struggling all around us. And as I said, these schools are struggling in circumstances that remain favorable for schools. I think things are going to get worse over time for schools. Now, this leads to my real argument, practically speaking, for homeschooling. What I believe is that it's going to be wasteful for Catholic families to continue investing in private schools only to have those schools disappear. When you see these schools closing, when you see or hear news that a Catholic school is closing, take a minute and think about the years and years of donations that were made to those schools. Think of people who died and left what they had to the schools. Think of the countless hours of volunteer work that were put into those schools through the years, only to have that school shut down. And all of that work, all of those donations were, in a moment, just buried in the ground. It's going to be increasingly difficult to invest in the future of schools that have no future. And so the question is going to be, should we invest in schools that were significant, or should we be investing in educational programs and services and resources that will be significant? And so I think it's going to be difficult for schools to continue to persuade people to make significant contributions. And many of these schools are completely dependent on fundraising, when the future of those investments is going to become more and more suspect. Am I going to donate $20,000 to a school that is privately talking about closing? This very strange dynamic develops where the school boards are simultaneously calling for donations and talking about closing. And I'll assume that that's true in many more places than we realize today, where there are schools hanging on the edge with their finger over that button all the time, and they keep staying alive, as it were, but every year the donations decrease, interest in the school and enrollment decrease, and they come closer and closer to finally hitting that button and closing the school. That's going to increase. What interests me is this future of education. What interests me most is that I believe that it paves the way for a renewal of classical Catholic education in a way that no one understands. I see glimpses of it because I see how online learning changes the way school works by moving from class-based or group-based education to individualized education. And as soon as that change takes place, where education moves from being a service given to groups to a service given to individuals, everything is going to change. Everything is going to change. There's going to be no more explanation for why anyone's talking about grade levels. There's no more classes. There's no more groups. Every student can work individually. Databases can handle individualized study plans. Databases can track progress. Databases can manage lessons. Databases can keep records of individual work. The whole nature of education, the whole method of education that we know of in modern schools no longer makes any sense. And I think it's going to disappear. And when that happens, or as that happens, I believe it's already true. It's just that parents don't realize it yet because they don't think about these things. As soon as education becomes an individual pursuit again, and that becomes the norm, the classical liberal arts are going to raise up and say, this is actually the best course of study for individual students, and there's going to be no competition. And when people wonder why in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy I always talk about playing the long game, and I don't care what people say or think about what we're doing at present, if those people aren't willing to listen and learn to the explanation of what we're doing and help us in it, I keep focused on the long game because I can see where the technology is leading education, and I want to have classical Catholic education ready to shine when that day comes. And there are so many things to think about and work on that no one sees on the surface. Which I'm not going to talk about. But I really believe that homeschooling is the future of education. I believe that the sooner parents acknowledge that, the better off their children will be. The continued development of technology, communication technology, speed of internet communication, wireless devices, video conferencing, video communication in general, as that just gets faster and more efficient, geographical separation is going to have almost no effect on the work we do, on the lessons we teach. And we need to be thinking about how we can prepare for that rather than trying to live in some kind of nostalgic fantasy land where we're going to send our children back so that they can experience our second grade experience and sort of relive it through them. I see many parents doing that, and those parents are going to be left hung out to dry, and I just don't understand what they're thinking. No one runs a business like that, and they're treating the education of their children like some kind of game. They're just playing like they're playing with dolls, rather than educating the next generation for their generation, rather than for the parents' generation. So this is what has me most interested in the future of education, because as I said, I believe that Catholic families, if they can free themselves from a number of false movements among Catholics, if they can see that a path is being prepared for the restoration of classical Catholic education And technology is actually leading us on that path. Catholic parents could get themselves aligned with that path and learn how to prosper and succeed in it. I often joke about technology because in the 1900s, all through when I was growing up, 1980s and 90s, we were always taught that we were on the verge of this amazing new high-tech world. Computers would do all this, and we had all these futuristic visions of what would happen. And the general attitude was that the old-fashioned life was stupid and backwards, and science and technology were going to lead us to all new ideas and experiences. And the opposite is actually happening. There are so many comical developments in technology. For example, vehicles, if you think about Tesla, just before I say that, I bought a Ford van in 2010. And when I bought it, the salesman excitedly told me that it's a flex fuel vehicle. And what that meant is it can run on ethanol. And ethanol comes from corn. Okay, so I've got a modern, high-tech vehicle. And this technology, this fuel technology, is leading us to use corn to fuel our vehicles. Now we see Tesla in 2021 developing electric vehicles. Vehicles that don't need gasoline at all, but run on electricity. And the next wave of questions will be, how can that electricity be produced? And we find that there are places where entire fields are being dedicated, thousands and thousands of acres are being dedicated to solar panels so that electricity can be generated. And if we step back or step out of this short-sighted, unthinking rush of people, all we're doing is departing from animal-based transportation, horses, mules, and so on, which were essentially solar-powered, corn-fueled transportation machines, to some metal and plastic versions of the same thing. And this is the technology, I believe, is going to lead us to see that God's original creation already had taken everything into consideration. All of the technology, as it continues to develop, as it continues to be corrected and improved, is just going to lead in a full circle back to creation. And we're going to see that the way God made the world was the best way. It was the only sustainable way. It was the only way that could reproduce itself. It was created to be reproductive. We're going to see more and more that technology just brings us back to where we started. And this is true of education. We're going to see that all of this educational technology, rather than leading us where its founders thought it was going to lead us, it's going to lead us instead back to the beginning. And those who trusted God and continued to keep their eyes fixed on God are going to be found to be the ones waiting for it when it finally returns. That's why I believe in 2021, moving forward, that homeschooling is better than private schooling, especially in a society where education is compulsory and every child is required to go to school. The schools are no longer necessary. Communications technology is developing so fast that the schools are dead men walking. They've been struck with mortal blows, and they're slowly bleeding out, as it were, making their last attempts to strike after they've already been destroyed by modern communications technology. And for us, we can be nostalgic. We can pretend, and this is what I really don't understand, we can pretend that the education of the 1950s or the 1980s is quote-unquote traditional, but it's not. The traditional education was the education of the 1200s, of the 1400s, of the 1600s. In the 1800s, the traditional education was abandoned, and this artificial, compulsory, brick and mortar school system was invented. I don't think the engineers of our modern society realize where this is going, but I believe it's going to run straight into the belly of scholasticism. And I believe there's going to be a renewal and a revival of scholastic learning and Catholic culture that's going to actually be brought about by this technology. I believe that many Catholics are missing it. I believe they're focusing on shallow ideas about tradition that aren't even tradition. They're trying to scapegoat technology for their own moral weaknesses. They're pridefully trying to brush things off that they're not skilled in rather than learning them. And they're unfortunately going to miss out on the opportunities that are available. But those who are willing to stop and look around, learn and listen from what's going on, what people are saying. The people in the world, the leaders of business and technology and marketing, are saying things that I don't believe they realize they're saying. And this is going to lead, I believe, right back to where we would like it to go. An individualized educational system where the best individual system is going to win, and no system is going to be able to compete with the scholastic curriculum, the classical Catholic curriculum. And so I believe we're headed to a renewal of classical Catholic education, and I hope that the Classical Liberal Arts Academy is going to have things in place and ready so that when those changes finally begin to come and people start to realize what's happening, we'll be there to beat the world at its own game. I hope that's a helpful discussion about homeschooling and private schooling. I know that there's a time where families are going to continue to depend on private schooling, and I'm not in any way criticizing any schools. You'll never really hear me criticizing schools because they're all necessary for different circumstances, but the circumstances are changing. That's my primary concern. The circumstances are changing, and what serves your goals as a Catholic parent is really going to determine what's best for you. And the advantages of the private school are fewer and fewer every year. I hope that's helpful. If you have any questions or if there's anything in this you'd like to talk about, please get in touch, comment, send me a message. I'd love to hear your thoughts. God bless.